I think we're ready for our first guest tonight. I'm really excited to have Arlan Hamilton, the founder and managing partner of Backstage Capital. We'll get a bit into Arlan's background in a second, but the crack team at TechTO told me she's obsessed with the TV show General Hospital and has been watching for 30 years. And that to me is impressive. Arlan, I remember watching it with my grandmother growing up.
Oh
So
yeah.
are you a true General Hospital fan?
Oh, big time fan, big time fan. They're like, the sports team, right? They're that team that I've counted on for so many years in good times and bad. And so, yeah, I'm a very proud General Hospital stan, as they say.
Glad we could start off with that. I'd love to start off learning a bit more about you. You have a fascinating background. It's like when I started reading about you, the first thing I've read was that you had this Norwegian pop punk band that you really loved, and you basically reached out and helped them go on tour. Can you tell me if that is that how you started off? You're
Yeah, I was
doing
working at
that,
a
and
bank. I was 20. I had just turned 21. I was working at a bank. Had been. It was like data entry and boring, and I was too good at it. It was like easy. And so I was listening to music, and I came across this song, and I thought it was really cute because it was about an artist, the artist Pink, and I love Pink, right? And so
okay.
this artist was this like band, but I never heard anybody like play music like this. So I got in touch with them and I said I wanted to see them play live. And they're like, yeah, that's cool, but we're in Norway. So they're like, they had attempted to do a tour in the US, but were, kind of able to do a couple shows in California, but it didn't really go anywhere. So I said, I'll give it a shot. I want to try to get you a tour. If you'll come out, I'll put it together, and they agreed to it. I guess we were both being wacky back then. It was sort of like, what do we have to lose here? And I taught myself how to put together a tour, and we toured the country 2 summers in a row.
So how'd you take that and then become like the managing? How you expanded from one Norwegian band to like managing arena level tours for famous artists? Like, what was the
Uh,
progression there, and how'd you go from
well,
being
10 years,
self-taught?
10 years.
Yeah,
It wasn't like overnight. I
10
mean,
years.
there was so much in between, so much in between. I first of all, even though I was having a lot of fun, I took it very seriously, this indie route. And so after that artist, which is Golden Boy, after we toured, I learned so much on those tours, even though it was just sort of this summer thing that we were doing. And then people heard about that I was doing that. So other indie artists reached out, and from Texas mostly, and said, will you do that for my tour? And so I booked the tours, and then I was the tour manager for those tours. And it was just a lot of that grind and a lot of that repetition, getting to know people, getting to know their needs. And then many years went by, and I published a music magazine called Interlude. I started a blog. I had multiple jobs. Most of them didn't work out, as you can imagine, because I'm here. And
Yeah.
and then starting at around 30, about 2010, what I want to go to a different level with this, because I love being on the road, and I think I'm really good at this because I had met so many people. And I said, I think I'm really good at this. I want to take this to a different level. But it really was like jumping across, two buildings. I just watched the Bourne trilogy again. It was like watching, jumping two buildings with a standing start. It was just like, how do you go from there? And I just reached out to 100 production managers and tour managers, and put myself out there, and over a few weeks period, got my first gig, and then went on from there.
And so you mentioned this was 2010. Is this a company you were looking at starting then? And because isn't that when you started looking at doing,
Yeah, so
venture
it
investing as
was like
well?
2010 or 11 when I really got into touring, and I had been on the road, and that's when I started like understanding what startups were, because of course I'd used startup products, and I also like applied to Airbnb, and but I didn't know that was a startup. I didn't know what it was, right? So I
Yeah.
applied to be a customer service agent for $12 to Airbnb, and I was not hired. So I have a bone to pick with Brian Chesky. We're going to have a word about that one day. But then I went on a few years later to hire one of his executives after they left Airbnb to work at Backstage. So I feel pretty good about that. But yeah, I was learning because I was on the road and I was seeing all these things, and I was also a very curious person. So when I was off the road, I was researching, and people like Ashton Kutcher and Ellen and Troy Carter were making these investments in small companies called startups. And I don't know, it all kind of came together for me, even though it probably was like right in front of me the whole time. Um, but I was like, oh, these are startups, and these are like people who put things together, and I've been doing that this whole time, but I didn't really have a structure for it or a name for it, or a culture wasn't around me. I felt like I was by myself, and so discovering that was really exciting, And then I went on to once I discovered it, I also saw,
Okay.
some of the bad parts. And some of the bad parts were that it wasn't as
Yeah.
inclusive as I would have hoped it would be, as I would have imagined something so innovative and so outside the box could be. It was very much so uh, homogenous and non-risk taking and all sorts of things. And I was like, well, that has to change, because that's not good. That's not what the startup uh, the world is. It's not the startup culture that I have bought into.
So
Yeah.
can I pick that apart a bit? So in 2000, you start learning about the startup scene, and I think one thing we've tried to do with TechTO communities make it accessible. And so it sounds like the whole space wasn't accessible back when you started, and probably isn't today. So what were your big observations? Like, why was this? Why do you believe the whole idea of a startup was new to you, and why do you believe it wasn't as diverse and inclusive as it should be back then?
Well, I don't. I've done a lot of research and now studying, so many
Yeah.
thousands of companies and others to figure this out. But at the time, it just seemed like a few people had figured it out, and kind of kept the secret closely held. And it's across like proximity too. So a lot of things were happening in Silicon Valley only, and like people were kind of reinforcing that idea that only good things could happen in tech in Silicon Valley, as if Toronto or Jackson, Mississippi had nothing else going for it, right? And so I think it was like this sort of insulated club that people had figured out was a lot of fun and very lucrative. But if they talk too much about, they may lose some of that, they thought, I think. And then also because of the way it was built, venture capital was built, around 75 years ago, give or take. It was built a very specific way by older white men who then kind of handed that off little by little to other people who reminded them of themselves, and a very insulated, again, and close proximity place. And when they got the reins, they would start investing in people who looked like them. And then it was just, you talk about the PayPal mafia. Well, there was some diversity in like immigrants being in that, but for the most part, you're talking about all male. You're talking about all white in the grand scheme of things, and they're billionaires. And then they invest in what they want to invest in, and they invest in more of the same because they want people in their image. And men tend to have like a legacy a thing about them. They're driven by legacy, which I am as well. So I don't think badly of it. But when you're driven by legacy, and you also have a lot of influence and power and money, you want more of you walking around. So you don't necessarily walk outside those lines and go looking for someone like me or someone like the many investments that I've made.
So you've discovered what was going on. You started startups. You saw it wasn't that inclusive or diverse, and you started to tackle this head on. So very different than most people. So what were you thinking, and how did you go about doing this? How did you go learning and breaking into venture and learning venture?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I wrote the book. It's About Damn Time, because it was just I was so heads down in it that I didn't think of it as something so wacky or out there. But now that I talk about it so much, people are like, "Wait a minute, how did you do that?" Well, I had no money. I had no real connections in Silicon Valley at the time that I started thinking about this. So I set out to do a few things. One was to look at what I did have. What did I have? Well, I had a different point of view. I wasn't afraid to say it. I could find a way to articulate it, even though it wasn't polished at the time. I could find a way to getting that across to people. I did have even though I didn't have a network in Silicon Valley, I did have network because I had spent so much time working with people over the years and trying to build reputation and trying to do good by others. And so I did have some pockets here and there of people I could, bounce things off of. I had a drive. I knew that the company itself, the fund Backstage, should exist. So that was this drive that was the fuel for everything. And then I also had a risk tolerance that I rarely find in other people still to this day, where I do feel like I have a lot to lose. It's not that I don't feel like I have something to lose. It's just that I'm willing to look silly. I'm really willing to look wrong and to be wrong and to fall on my face and to do so very publicly, because I'm also very committed and convicted in my views and what I think is the right thing to do. I also really want to be wealthy, and I want to be wealthy so I can share that wealth, and so I can have autonomy and do the things and have a high quality of life. So all of those things combined, I just said, well, let me go out, do as much research as I can, learn as much as I can, be kind of create this sort of world for myself and opportunity for myself. And then I set out and did that. And it was just this ability to talk to so many people and hear a negative reaction and be able to just keep going from that.
And tell me about that journey, because from what I understand, like, I don't think anyone's handing out checks to you when you started the idea of Backstage Capital. So what were the struggles you had to get through? And then what was a pivotal moment where things turned around a bit and you started getting a bit of, I guess, let's say, success?
So for the first few years, no one invested in Backstage. I had people who were kind to me and people who would listen to me, but for the most part, it was people who didn't think that this was a viable idea. And certainly, even if they may have thought maybe I'm right about it, they didn't think that I was the one to do it, because I just was coming out of left field to them. So it was this sort of convincing people, unfortunately having to convince people, yes, Black people create companies that are viable. Yes, women are creating companies at record numbers, of course, and they're viable. And it's not a philanthropic effort to back them. It's not out of the goodness of your heart necessarily. Those types of things, when you are that person, when I'm a gay Black woman, having to explain not only myself, but the people who have raised me, it can be dehumanizing at some points, so that was tough, but I kept going with it because I knew I was right. And then it was just like practical stuff. I ran out of capital. I didn't really have any to begin with, but I just ran out of options. The older I got, the more favors I, called in, the fewer I had. And so I found myself with a lot of housing insecurity, and that's been promoted plenty. And it's true. In fact, some people question if I'm embellishing about that. And my answer to that is actually, I'm not telling you all of the extent of it. It was actually worse than what has been reported. So that was going on. And then 2015, I met a woman named Susan Kimberlin. And I've probably said her name 1,000 times at this point, because even though she, her amount was $25,000 to help me invest in somebody else, and then another $25,000 to invest in me, the startup. And even though I've gone on to raise more than $12 million and generate millions of dollars in revenue, I will always remember that I will always remember her for that moment, and always treasure that. So I encourage people to be someone's first yes when it comes to things, because there's no dollar amount on it. If Susan I'll tell her this now, but if she had given me $5,000, I would have said, okay, she believes in me, I'm going to go. And that was just something very special to kickstart what we were doing.
And then she kickstarted it, and since then you've been actively investing. I've read that you have over 100 portfolio companies.
Yes, I have. Well, we've invested in like another dozen or so during COVID, so it's probably at 140-ish at this point. companies, and that's probably 300 founders.
What advice do you have for founders seeking capital, especially ones that where it doesn't seem actively as easily available for? What are the lessons you have? I think I hear lots of hard work and lots of hustle, and you've now invested in 140 companies. Is there any takeaways or lessons that people should have?
Well, honestly, and I say this quite often, and I really mean it, focusing on the company itself, building up your company, doing the most that you can with what you have is probably the most important piece of advice I can give you, and the most important thing you can do. I see so many founders who will take like 6 to 12 months off of like really building what could be a great company so they can go and convince somebody else to invest money into them based on what they did those 6 months ago. And when you ask them, what's your traction like, or how is the product developed? And they'll say, well, it's been stalled because I can't find any money. Excuse, because I've been there, and I was, in fact, my product was capital. So you can't convince me that you can't find something. It has to be more than your ability to raise. It has to be your ability to attract other people to do things with you, to find in-kind ways. There has to do with your ability to figure out ways to, there's always a way to make the amount of money you believe you need less. There's always a way to work around. And so that ability to do that is so interesting to me. You're going to then paradoxically attract money by the more that you don't need it, you're going to attract more of it. So I would just focus on that, because everybody has that power within them. Everybody can do something today to make them a little bit more self-reliant, and yeah, that's where I would start with it. And my book talks a lot more about that.
I love that answer. That's very inspiring, and I wish every founder could hear that. Can I ask? I know we're coming up on time, but I have two quick questions I want to take from the audience. Bobby Rossett asked, "Do you have any Canadian startups in your portfolio?"
Canadian startups. I don't believe we have any Canadian startups that actively live in Canada right now. I did last year go to Canada a couple of different times, in Toronto as well. I mean, in Toronto, and definitely saw some amazing things that we're very, very interested in. So we actually just started investing in England, which turned out to be 5 African companies, or African-led companies, either first or second generation, just last year. So we're making our rounds.
Okay, and just a quick follow-up. Wonder if someone wants to reach out to about financing, what's the best way to go get in touch with you?
BackstageCapital.com/apply. We are one of the few funds, and one of the earliest funds, to make an open application process available to you.
Okay. I'm going to take one last question from our audience. I think it's Melena Ray. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Here's my question: What innovations inspire Arlan to keep going and dream bigger?
I'm going to say something real corny. The innovation of you, the fact that we can, like I said earlier, we have so much power innately in us. That really inspires me. Like I can point to an app or to a product or something like that, or even to a person, and say that invention inspires me. But it really is our power to innovate and iterate on ourselves, so that no matter what our current circumstances, we can always make it better, or we can always change it in some way. And I'm living proof of it. And I've seen it happen over and over again when people stop like looking outward for things, and really look inward for, what can I control? What talent do I already have? What is within me? To me, the startup of you is really powerful to me.
I love that, because what I'm hearing is a idea of basically tenacity and investing in yourself. If you have time for one more question, I saw a great one.
Sure, let's do one more. I am back to back though.
Okay. It was basically, is there any legal or systematic change that would help, if you could wave your wand and change something about the system that would help encourage more diversity?
Yes. Well, there's 2. One is that LPs are the limited partners who invest, the institutions and high net worth individuals who invest in the funds that then go out and invest in others, that there were a law or some sort of mandate that they had to put X amount of funding towards seeing more diverse deal flow. And one of the reasons is somebody, we've been talking about this a lot for years, but what somebody recently brought it back up is that a lot of the money that goes into venture capital, into those funds, comes from people's pensions. So you have people who are like working people from all diverse backgrounds who are actually paying into that money, and then it gets whitewashed, if you will. And it turns into, oh, it only goes to these certain people on this certain time, and that is not okay. And so I think something has to break there. We've been trying to do something there for 4 years at least, actively. Something has to break there. The other thing is changing, I don't know what it is in Canada actually, but in the US, changing the laws and the stipulations around accredited investors. Again, it's something that a lot of us talk about and a lot of us are trying to change. And I think there is something out there that is going to change pretty quickly. But the fact that you can, if you make under 200,000, maybe you work at a tech company, you're a product manager or something like that, and you could today go to Vegas and waste $2,000 within 20 minutes. I've seen it happen. People can do that, but you're not allowed to invest $2,000 into accredited only deals. Now, I have BackstageCrowd.com, which is our syndicate, which allows for accredited and non-accredited different deals. But there's no reason there should be that distinction, in my opinion, and so those things can really change everything in the next 10 years.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And our laws are basically the same. It's like 200,000 US dollars income. You have to have 200,000 Canadian to be accredited.
It's very
silly law. Arlan, thank you so much for your time. This was very insightful. I encourage anyone that wants to learn more about you to go buy the book. It's about damn time. And, I hope next time we talk that you have a couple investments.
I would love to.
Canada.
Yeah, we're making our rounds, we're making our rounds, but you have some great stuff I've seen up there. Incredible.